Well, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Wow, what an amazing story and what an experience. So it is now my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for the panel that follows, and it is Mercy A. Quay. And Mercy has a storied career in journalism, communications, and public relations. And she has spent a decade to work here in New Haven as well as Connecticut with many different companies, the nonprofit sector, the public sector. So we're in for a real treat getting to know her a little better. And she has recently founded the Narrative Project, which is a company that works with organizations that do good in the world. And she is a professor for digital journalism at Southern Connecticut State University. She's also on the editorial board of the Connecticut Mirror and a columnist for Hearst Connecticut Media. And finally, well, not finally, it's a long list, of course, but she's also the vice president for the Connecticut Association for Professional Journalists. So please help me welcome Mercy. Mercy, over to you.
Well, what a film, huh? Can we just get another round of applause for that film? And I have the esteemed pleasure of introducing the rest of our panelists for the evening. And I'm going to start with Nathan Havey. And one thing I'm going to do is just as I introduce you, feel free to join me here on stage. So Nathan Havey unlocks companies to become the greatest versions of themselves. A believer in the transformative power of stories, Nathan wrote and directed an acclaimed podcast series called 10 Things You Should Know About Stakeholder Capitalism, and an award-winning documentary film we just saw, Beyond Zero. The film is currently being used by companies like KKR and UPS to show their teams how businesses can rise to meet the global challenges we face. Next, we have Adrienne Farwell. I'm pretty sure I said that last name right, but she will correct me when she gets on stage with me. And Adrienne is the founder and president and CEO of Greater Bridgeport Community Enterprises, a nonprofit community development corporation that develops nonprofit sustainability enterprises to create jobs for disadvantaged area residents, researches trends in environment-focused business development, has trained and placed a low to moderate income residents in green jobs, and advocates for green economy jobs in the Bridgeport area and throughout the state of Connecticut. Joining me next is Ryan Akers, who is the Regional Sales Director for Interface's New England business. Ryan leans into problems with customers and while also creating opportunities to share business case for sustainability. He is a Ray C. Anderson Award winner, following in Ray's footsteps for finding creative, innovative, and engaging ways to educate customers to do well by doing good. And then finally, Jen Molnar, who is the Managing Director and Lead Scientist for the Nature Conservancy's Center for Sustainability Science, developing scalable solutions for climate and nature that leverages business, finance, and policy. She has over 20 years of experience bringing science decisions to help improve the state of the natural world and how people depend on it, including through research, global investments, corporate practice innovation, and environmental remediation. Thank you all for joining me. So Nathan, I'm going to start with you because this was a phenomenal film, and I think everyone here can agree that we are now changed from having consumed that for the 85 minutes, I believe that was.
That's right. 82.
82. Okay. I want to be conservative with my usage of time as well. So I want to start with you because for me, the most interesting piece here is you're a storyteller, I'm a storyteller, and finding stories is the most interesting piece about storytelling for me. Where do you find the impactful story? How do you tell it? And who do you bring to the table to help you tell it? And for me, the question I want to start with is, how did you find out about Ray Anderson in the story and in the interface?
Yeah, thank you. The way I found out about it is I picked up a book that Ray wrote in about 2010. It's called Confessions of a Radical Industrialist. And I read it, and it changed my life. It changed my career. Everything that I'm doing today started there. And so that's how I found the story.
And as you were telling the story, tell me about how the story impacted. You said it changed you and you learned about his legacy. Tell me more about how it changed you and what you learned about his legacy.
For sure, yeah. I think it was the first time that I'd encountered the idea that we say kind of early in the film that business is the only thing with this scale in the modern world to be able to deal with some of the biggest challenges that we have. And there's incredible work happening in the nonprofit community. There's some governments around the world that are really leading on this. But if business doesn't really reach a tipping point and get in the act of solving for sustainability and for other challenges, we could be, as Paul Hawkins said, screwed. And so I just got that. It rang true for me, and I left what was a career in policy and started working on corporate transformation. And so I've been doing that for a decade, and I was always used this story to show people that it's possible, but nobody knows the story. And I don't know why. It's so good. There's some people in like the green building space that have heard of it before. Maybe some of you had heard of it. But everybody, even there that's heard of it, they only knew it up to Ray's death in 2011. And everything that's happened since then is like a closely guarded secret. It's not Interface's intention to do that. It just, there hasn't been a good telling of it yet. And I thought that I would try to take a whack at it. And the company gave me unfettered access to their archive, no financial support. I didn't want it because I wanted it to be a totally independent production. But I took a whack. And now 2 years later, we've been able to do some kind of cool stuff with it. And you'll be the judge, but I think it's a good telling.
Is it a good telling, folks?
Yeah.
So I am now just even more amazed and interested in you, and I would love to introduce you a little bit more to this audience here today. You started your career in policy, you left policy to do this kind of work. How did you get into filmmaking to begin with?
So that's a family business. My dad is the one that's Havey Productions up there with the little studio tag. So he's been doing documentary film for 40 years, but mostly like historical docs of Colorado and the Rocky Mountain West. We're from Denver. And I had never thought I would make a feature film. I've dabbled in like little web videos and things. I was an actor in college for a part of it, political science and public policy. We're going to have to
see evidence of that.
Yeah, later. There's something about telling a story on film that can be transmitted so much better than really any other medium can. The number of people that'll watch a movie versus read a book versus listen to a podcast, it is sort of the language of our society. And so I thought that would probably be the right form for this. And again, it's first film, so I just thought I'd see what happened. And now there's 2 more in production because it seems to be working.
Yeah. And one of the things that, again, as a storyteller, before I move on to inquiring with the rest of our panels, one of the things that I know about storytelling is that it's incredibly difficult to nail it, right? And there are things that are left on the cutting room floor all the time. We have waste in our ideas, right? So what for you was the hardest part about getting to this final cut?
I think there's very specific lessons in here that I think the business world needs to really study. And so it was trying to weave the narrative in a way that it was still an engaging and watchable film without being preachy, but also making sure that all of the kernels of what will transform the business world, I believe they're in here, trying to get all that stuff together. And I think that was the real difficult part. And, we did test audiences for a couple of months before we locked the cut to submit to festivals. And, we used a business metric, the Net Promoter Score, to see how it was going for folks. And the first cut was about a 50, and then this cut usually runs in about 85. And so that's the best I could get it and feel like it was still doing what it needed to do.
Awesome. And I'm gonna turn our attention to you, Ryan, for a little bit. For someone presently working at Interface and is in the business, understanding what happens behind closed doors and in front of the open doors, there are lots of mission-driven organizations out there. They're doing amazing things, and not oftentimes are those organizations for profit, right? And certainly they're not selling carpet. So tell me, for you, how have you seen Interface sort of take this trajectory and decide to carve an avenue out for themselves and say, we can do this?
Well, first, Nathan, you nailed the video. It got me choked up watching this. That's great work.
Thank you.
It's a great question. We are a publicly traded company, and as the sales director up here in New England, there is a constant drumbeat to hit the number and to report to Wall Street. That happens every single day, every quarter, every year. But what makes this so special is that everything that we do is around sustainability. It's around climate takeback, and that actually gives us this kind of a David and Goliath attitude, and that we are disruptors, and that people that work here feel that they are connected to a higher purpose. It makes everyone more engaged, and it's actually a competitive advantage for us. So when we get up, we have connection way beyond just making that number, and that's what really makes it so special.
And okay, so for you, I just, you are the winner of the Ray Anderson Award, and I can't imagine working for an organization that has a founder with a founder story like this, as impactful as it is, and then being the most recent recipient of his named award, right? How does that feel? Before we do anything else, talk to me about how that feels.
It feels really, really good. It's the most prestigious award that you can earn at the company. There's Salesman of the Year, there's Region of the Year. There's a lot of other awards that we give out each year, and that are really, really meaningful. There's value awards, but the Ray C. Anderson is the namesake. There's very few people in that club, and it is the most meaningful thing I've accomplished in the time I've been here.
So treat me as though I'm interviewing for a position. And if I ask you the question, walk me through a day in the life here at Interface, what am I seeing?
You're seeing a lot of creativity. You're seeing a lot of people that don't have it all figured out. And if you like to be part of the solution, and you are connected to a higher purpose, and you want to save the planet, then you might want to try talking with us.
I'll consider it. So my last question before I move on to you, Adrian, just so you are warming up your mic. I'm wondering, tell me how you still feel, whether you still feel Ray's legacy, and what are the ways that people bring that to work every day?
Good question. The first thing is that a lot of the people that you saw in this video, it's funny to see like the transformation, I guess, of the younger version and I guess the current day version. They're still here. You had Connie still here, you had Chip still here, Dan Hendricks still here. And so it's hard not to feel that, through them. Just last week, I was doing the IIDA New England Design Awards in Boston, and I needed a judge to jury all the great projects that we were working on, and I call up my buddy Chip DeGrace, and he's on a plane, he's right there. So like that David and Goliath with the moonshot, that Ray put us onto, it binds us way more than our job description. And people stand up every day and do what they have to do to make sure that their peers and that are taken care of. And so I feel it all the way through. And in the new mission that we're on, we're going to be carbon negative by 2040, which I don't think we have all figured out. But it's that next moonshot. And every step that we take in our product development it starts with, the carbon impact.
And I just love that you keep saying a moonshot, right? Because anyone who knows me or follows me on any social media knows that I'm a huge space nerd. And the moonshot is essentially it's the idea that you grow to the mold that you give yourself, right? And I love the humility in we don't know how we're going to get there yet, but we know that we're going to set out the path and we're going to set that goal. Now, Adrian, I can't help but think about environmental justice, environmental racism, and the sort of impacts that we see businesses, corporations, industries have on communities of color, on low-income communities, and doing the work that you do in Bridgeport. I know that these are things you care deeply about. I would love for you to introduce yourself to the audience by telling us a little bit about that work and what can folks see from your work coming out of Bridgeport.
Wow. So to start, though, I would like to say to Nathan that I've seen this film 3 times now, and that there's always something more to discover in it. It's layered, it's deep, and it brings out extreme emotion in those of us who watch it and feel. Some of the stuff that comes out makes me think first of leadership, impact, innovation, imagination. Those are really key to what business can do. I think it's kind of taking it to the highest level. And in terms of environmental justice, we've seen kind of the reverse of that, and how business has impacted communities, and/or people have been sent to parts and geographical communities where business was, which was dangerous for them. And that's kind of a result of redlining, of severe segregation in terms of housing for the most part. So environmental justice, we see that every day in just about all of our communities. Stanford has really had a program to develop parts of its community which were really disadvantaged, and has made a great success of that. Bridgeport has a long way to go because we still have almost all of our waterfront communities are EJ communities. In fact, Bridgeport itself has been defined by our state in terms of our Department of Economic Development as a disadvantaged community, and in terms of DEEP, which is our EPA, in terms as an environmental justice community. So looking at the whole city, we're suffering a lot from air pollution and all that that brings in terms of health challenges. We're bifurcated by 2 major highways, so you can imagine what that brings. And then we have certain sectors that are fairly low because we are a maritime community, and they are suffering from sea rise and all sorts of issues in terms of what our infrastructure looks like in Bridgeport. So the environmental justice movement has gotten a big boost with our current administration, our federal administration, because President Biden a year ago, a little more than a year ago, put out executive orders saying that we had to pay attention to investment in environmental justice communities. And so every federal dollar, and by by comparison also all of our state dollars, when we look at investing in different kinds of energy projects, clean energy, renewable energy, we have to think about 40% of that project, dollar-wise, going into the benefit for environmental justice communities. That's a big deal because, as you know, there have been legislation and bills and now law that has given us major budgets that we can invest in our infrastructure. And we do need that investment here in Connecticut. We need it a lot in cities like Bridgeport. And Bridgeport's not the only one. There are other communities exactly like Bridgeport, and parts of communities along our seafront, for instance, even though they may be overall relatively well-off communities, there's part of those communities that do need this investment as well. So to go back to the film and what kind of impact we might think that business can have positively. Yes, business can deal with itself positively, but they can also be leaders in the community. We have a couple of organizations that we've set up in Bridgeport, and we always include the business community, and we always include those businesses and manufacturers who are in the environmental production line, so to speak. So, those who are, for instance, producing our fuel cells, those who are in the manufacturing chain, the supply chain that goes into those kinds of batteries, and we're going to be talking about the hydrogen pretty soon. We're already talking about wind farms. Bridgeport is kind of the back office for wind farms that we have in Connecticut, or we're going to be stationed off the coast. So there's a lot to be done, a lot to be looking forward to. We have to get organized, but we cannot organize community against business. We have to organize with business.
And I would also add, we have to organize with community.
Yes.
Right. And so you're doing a great deal of community work directly with directly impacted communities and bringing
Yes.
them in. Talk to me about that process. What are you seeing change from that kind of work?
Well, I think there's a big impetus that's been given by the environmental justice movement, which of course, as I just said, has been boosted by the federal guidelines. So what we are seeing is that there's a great deal more attention paid to what the community has to say and what the community is feeling and what the community thinks it needs. But there's got to be a big crossover in terms of knowledge about technology, especially in the environmental sectors. And I've been working a lot in terms of, energy conservation and clean energy development. And in that respect, people need to know what technology can bring to us. And then the people who are developing the technology need to know what it is that the community needs. What does Aunt Tilly need? Aunt Tilly lives on Union Avenue in Bridgeport. What is she seeing in terms of her energy consummation, in terms of sustainability? What is her community suffering from? And therefore, what can business bring in terms of solutions?
So, okay. I think one of the jobs of a storyteller is to make things relatable and make them easily understandable, right? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about Aunt Tilly for a second, right? Mm-hmm. How can, and this is going to be a tag team effort, we see a company like Interface, right? And we see the amount of work they're doing to go beyond zero, right? To be net positive, right? And so when we think about Aunt Tilly, who lives on Union Avenue in Bridgeport, right? A real example, a real life person. How can we see the effects of the work, of the efforts in a company like Interface directly impact Aunt Tilly's life? And this can be a two-part, we can tackle this in many ways.
Are you asking me directly? Because I think
a company like Interface.
I think that the Aunt Tilly's life is going to be impacted by relieving her energy burden, giving her more choices in terms of how she solves problems within her household and in her neighborhood, making sure that the health burdens that are put upon her by all of the problems that we have in terms of air pollution are relieved. In terms of transportation, how can we, get rid of all of those gas guzzlers that are driving up and down the highways that are polluting her neighborhood? Those are things that Aunt Tilly feels. Now, in terms of what Interface is doing for its own company, it is also paying salaries to 5,000 people, if I understand it correctly. That means those people understand the impact of environment, and they understand what they can do in their communities to help that community recognize what it needs in terms of clean energy and in terms of renewable energy. That, I think, is probably even more impactful perhaps than what it's doing for itself. The idea of getting to net zero and beyond net zero is not only laudable but fantastic, but those people are going out and changing their communities daily.
You've got 500 ambassadors working for the causes of environmental justice and for the causes of environmental...
And being examples of how that can be done.
Exactly. Thank you for that. Now, Jen, you have worked with companies, industries, some of the country's largest industries on exactly what they can be doing to improve their carbon emissions and sustainability. Talk to me about some of the things you've seen in your work, and talk to me about just the impact this film has made and what you're seeing from the film and how that relates to the work you've seen. That was like a 6-part question. Good luck.
I'll try to unpack it. No, thanks. And I also wanted to start by just thanking and congratulating Nathan too, because I think this is a really powerful story and moving this work forward. That it's not only that inspiration around all the creativity and innovation happening within the company, but also the longevity of the effort and really building it into the culture of the company and being able to show that it makes business sense to do that, and that this is a competitive advantage and that it makes sense is something that really is powerful for other companies to see. So thank you for that. But yeah, no, it's tough because you don't always have that leader that has that epiphany and then drives change within the company. So it's great when it does happen and take advantage of it when it does. But a lot of times when we see companies looking at how can they step into sustainability, there's often some kind of pressure. Sometimes it comes from that leadership within, but oftentimes it comes from outside. And then you also have to have leadership ready to see that as a chance for innovation and a chance to take advantage of an opportunity. So the pressures can be things like regulations from government or anticipating future regulations around climate change that companies are getting ready to anticipate. Today, a lot of investors are asking companies, what is your climate risk and what are you doing about it? That helps drive change internally. Communities that they're working in, customers are increasingly asking questions about these issues that helps drive change. And something you touched on with your question for Ryan, employees within companies are an important voice. A lot of companies now are seeing sustainability activity as part of their ability to attract and retain top talent. There was a study recently done by Yale and partners that found over half of business school students are willing to take a pay cut to work at a company that's more sustainable. So you have a real, there's a lot of pressures now for companies to actually be doing something about this. And then you have to have that leadership ready to jump in and say, what do we do about this? And not just dig in their heels, but say, how do we take advantage of this and actually go forward? So it's happening in different ways in a lot of different companies because all of them are in different places on that journey, but it's been good to see that momentum of pressure and also the opportunity for creativity and innovation.
So one of my next question was going to be about buy-in. How do you create buy-in? But it sounds like buy-in is already there, right? So how do you tap into it? How do you find the talent that is already invested? If a company right now were to say, I'm inspired by this and I want to find the talent who's interested, where can they go and how do you tap into that buy-in?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. And I'm thinking back over, I've worked with companies for about 12 years now with TNC, and we've early on, a lot of the conversations we had with companies were how to convince them that there's a business case. And now a lot of companies are coming to us. So it's a matter of figuring out where are there solutions where we can be a partner to think through, bring in new kinds of science, new kinds of data to the table, new views on the issues that they're dealing with, and how do we create new things together. A lot of times around sustainability, in the broadest sense, I see it as really kind of broadening the perspective on how you're approaching a business challenge. So you're not just thinking about, how do we sell more widgets or how do we, reduce our costs, but how do you think about the context of the environment around that issue? How do you think about the communities that are being impacted, the value chain, the suppliers? And as you look at that, it can be more complex to address as a challenge, but it also opens up more opportunities for solutions. So bringing different people to the table to bring different perspectives can be really powerful. So whether it's an NGO like the Nature Conservancy, or you get an eco dream team pulled together, and there's, just bringing new perspectives to what you're trying to do to move the business forward and have a viable business, but also be bringing solutions that are touching on the environment, are touching on community that can really help improve the world for all of us.
Thank you for that. And from your work, because I'm just deeply inspired by your work, can you tell me about a story or a time inside of, right, I'm interviewing you now, right? So can you tell me about a time or a story from your work where you had this moment of, we're doing this and we're doing it well and we're doing it right? We would love to hear that.
Yeah, and it's sort of a small moment, but one story I go back to and thinking a lot about culture change as part of the story being told here. culture change comes down to, how do you get people, individuals within a company, to change what they're doing and how they're making decisions, and how do you kind of inspire that, purpose-driven action. We've had a long-time partnership with Dow Chemical Company where we've looked at how they could, not only reduce their impact on nature, but also invest in it as part of their business solutions. And we had, about 10 years ago, we were meeting with staff in their Texas office to look at how they could invest in nature-based solutions in one of their watersheds. And so we had engineers in the room who are, have traditional ways that they do things, and we were bringing new kinds of tools to the table. And so we had, you can imagine a small conference room, a bunch of technical folks around the table, and, understanding where each other were coming from, how you could build trust across that, think about new solutions. And at the end of the day, we were sitting around kind of figuring out next steps, and their water lead said, "I'm really excited to learn to look at the world through the Conservancy's glasses." And it was just such a powerful moment, both in kind of how we could come together to work together and develop new solutions, but also I think that's a really powerful way to think about how do we step in, broaden our perspective, think about these challenges in new ways, and then use that to develop solutions.
That's a fantastic answer. Thank you for that. And as I wrap up, before I turn to the audience for any audience questions, one thing I want an answer from each of you on, and Jen, since you have the mic, I'll have you start, and then we can come back down the line this way. At the table earlier today, we all sat down for dinner. We were having a conversation. One of the things that I said is hope is a discipline, right? And when we talk about the environment, and when we talk about efforts to ensure that human-caused climate change doesn't evict us from our only home, right? There is a way that we need to be disciplined in our hope. So my question to you and the entire panel is, how are you remaining disciplined in your hope?
That's a big question. I think it is this, optimism that there are solutions out there that we need to be working towards, and being part of that solution helps to see that there's some possibility there.
That's a good answer. I stay disciplined by staying a student. I'm not the expert, but I continue to show up and learn from those who know more than me. I'm a carbon lover at our company, and that's just, I guess, a group of carbon extremists that I'm part of. So there's regular opportunities for me every month to learn more. I'm part of other networks that there's a thing called Earth Up right now that it helps you measure your carbon impact and find solutions at home for you to be more sustainable in the everyday things that you purchase. So I helped be a pilot group for those guys to get their app and their program off the ground. And so I just never stop. This is my discipline.
Thank you for that.
I guess my discipline is that I work at this every day. And so you can see small baby steps. You can see sometimes the steps go backwards, but there's always some portion of the stuff that you're working with that is moving forward, even if it does seem a little bit glacial in terms of how it's moving. But after you've been working at this for a couple of decades, you're
seasoned.
Yeah, seasoned. You can kind of see that things that were like unheard of, talking about sustainability like 25 years ago, there weren't many people who knew what you're talking about. And now it's on the lips of people who live next door to Aunt Tilly.
And for me, there's kind of these opposing forces where on the one hand, you do what you can today and tomorrow, but then you've also got to continually ask, is this going to work? Right? Because I think a lot of folks in companies in like CSR and even in a lot of different nonprofits, they're doing the good work, which is great and worthy, but is it going to work? And is it just helping, or is it actually going to solve whatever the issue is that we're talking about, right? And can you solve it today? No. But if you're not constantly asking, is this structure, is this enough? What's missing for us to actually solve it? That's the discipline, I think, that has it be, what was your term? The discipline of hope?
Yeah, discipline.
Yeah, I guess it's because it's you don't want hope to just lack a plan and just sort of be, well, I hope this works. I think it's more than that. And so it's the discipline part is making sure that you're constantly looking for how to get better.
Thank you for that. Join me in a round of applause for this esteemed panel. And as I look out into the audience to see folks who can help with questions, there it is. There's a question over in the back. Great.
Thank you very much. I, for one, we have solar panels, drive a hybrid car, eat vegan, and heat our house with wood. I can just say that we have our electricity this summer, we got credit for. That's just one way of making things work, but not the solution. We also actively hike in Devil's Den, so thank you to the Nature Conservancy. And we are very much part of planting the 1 million trees for the National Forest Foundation. But I was so impressed with this film. I also have to say we buy interface carpets, and they do not wear. But this film,
do they burn anymore?
No, they are marvelous. I highly recommend them. This film is what interests me. It exceeded my expectations in every way. I watched Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. I watched Leonardo DiCaprio's Fire on Ice, and no other film told the story of the second industrial revolution like this film. You have coined so many terms. I understand you are taking this to business schools. Could you please talk about that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that accolade. That will stay with me. I appreciate that. So part of the plan for the film, there's kind of two core audiences that I'm going after, and I say it as boardrooms and classrooms. And so the boardroom strategy, Mercy had mentioned in the beginning in my intro that we've had some success and continue to have success. But there's a lot of interest from business teachers in using this film in their classrooms it's kind of what you had said about what Jen said about the seeing the world through the Nature Conservancy's glasses. There is a different paradigm for business that this film invites people into, and there's a lot more past this. And so what we're actually trying to do is make the film available to any business professor or educator anywhere in the world that is interested in this, but then collect the email address to be able to feed a pipeline of this kind of stuff that is aligned with the accreditation standards that they have to meet, with their curriculum objectives, and then make it freely available. And so we just invested our first bit of money in creating specific curriculum materials around the film first. And then as it continues to mature, we're trying to do it in an open source kind of a way so that professors that use it can pay it forward by giving their class notes and all that kind of stuff. And ideally, we can get that going in the 13 languages that are spoken in the world's top 20 economies. That's the goal. And so adoption-wise, name it, for the big business schools in the United States, they're all using it, which is great. I've got a list of 300 requests from individual professors that stumbled upon the movie somehow. There's no budget for this, but they are literally from all 6 inhabited continents. The big business school in China is using this, even in Moscow. Throughout Latin America, there's a huge minor program around concepts similar to this that also features the film at the big business school in Mexico that has just been piloted. So there's many innovators that are trying to lead the change in the way we teach business people how to think, but in many ways that effort's just getting started.
Thank you for that. We have another question over here.
Were you able to interview any, I guess, lower echelon workers, people, the blue collar workers, people on the assembly lines?
I was not able to do that in the film. I tried, and we had no budget for this. So I literally had 3 days to do all of the primary interviews. And we had someone booked for that we were going to be able to talk to during the factory tour. And she called out sick that day. And so I lost the opportunity. It's still a major regret for me about how this movie went. And the next movie, there are 12 primary characters that we're following for 5 years that are blue collar factory workers in the next story. So I will not make that mistake again.
Along that line, were you able to interview any, let's say, customers or other companies that were persuaded to join them?
We weren't, and part of this is that I'm really I was a stickler in this process for making sure that we had the core narrative story, and so anybody that was just going to sort of comment on it that wasn't a character that helped to move the action forward in the film, I refused to do that. I got a lot of advice that we should, to even interview other companies and talk about kind of their perspective on it. But that is a critique I have on most documentaries where they lose their narrative thread and become preachy and kind of about an issue. And so stylistic choice, but that's something I deliberately did not want to do.
Thank you for that. Another question over here.
Yes. Is there a way that we can get our government, either local, state, or federal, either with the use of a carrot or a stick, to incentivize our businesses to become beyond zero?
So I'm going to actually kick that over here to you, Ryan.
To me?
Yeah. And Jen, you can pick that up as well. The whole panel can pick that up.
So in the carpet industry, it's happening in a few places with legislation out in California where California has legislated recycling, and there's a recycling tax on every square foot of carpet that's being sold from the entire industry, and that's to help fund the return of all the carpet to keep out of the landfill. And that bill, that same or very, very similar bill, is on the desk of the governor of New York that just needs a signature. So I think that maybe those are two examples of where at least the carpet industry is using legislation to create meaningful change. Because right now, in the carpet industry, 5% of all the carpet is being returned for reclamation. And interface is best in industry, and we still have a long ways to go.
Jen, do you have anything to add on that one?
Sure. And on the climate space, and I mentioned investors are starting to ask about climate. There's been an effort on the voluntary action side for the last few years, really driven initially by Bloomberg, to disclose climate risk as part of your financial disclosures. There's this terrible acronym TCFD. It's a Task Force for Climate-Related Financial Risk Disclosure. It's a mouthful, but it's powerful. And when the investors are calling and saying, what is your climate risk, there's actually a methodology behind reporting out that. And that's starting to get built into government regulations. And the SEC has some draft rulings now. So if you start getting those types of questions, not only coming from investors, but also expectations from SEC around your filings on disclosing what the specifics on the climate risk are, you start getting companies saying, this is something we need to think about. This is something we need to be addressing, and having, then they figure out, how do you do that? So I think there are some ways, whether it's industry specific or on some of these specific issues, that government can play an important role to kind of lift all boats. That you need first movers out there to show how it can be done, but then how do you get everybody to be moving in that direction can be powerful.
Can I add one thing to that too?
Yeah.
I think you can have power with your spend. Whether you're a consumer or with a business, there's more and more information that is readily available for people to make smart decisions on the sustainability aspects of whatever the product or service is. And you can look at Rothy's, you can look at Allbirds, you can look at Adidas, you can look at Delta, where you can see what the impact of your purchase is. And so more and more customers are choosing to put the pressure on business, by how they choose to allocate spend.
And I'll just add two things real quick. So two of the other policy levers that I think are interesting is one of them is we've got to understand that right now a lot of federal in particular, but not just federal, a lot of government incentivizing is going to things that are not only not like sustainable, but they're not sustainable, right? They're like the some of the worst practices that there are still, the prices for those things are artificially depressed because of government subsidies and all that kind of stuff. So just taking the thumb off of that scale is one of the things that could happen. That's politically dicey to do that, but that's one of the things. The other one, though, that's somewhat more palatable is just through government's own procurement policy. So I believe, and tell me if I'm wrong on this, but I think the California government also just wrote into kind of its spec for any new buildings or any new renovations that they're actually going to pay attention to the embodied carbon in the materials that they use for construction and finishing. And so when you do that, then suddenly that introduces that as a metric in the market, and companies like Interface will win the bids, generally speaking, when that is there. And that creates tremendous competitive pressure to drive industry just through what government says it will buy and how it will consider those contracts.
There's one other aspect that's very popular here in Connecticut and across the United States, and that is extended producer responsibility. And that is the whole notion that those who manufacture a certain kind of product are responsible through the entire lifespan of that product, including how it's disposed of. And that's what we're doing actually in my business, in the mattress recycling, that is sponsored and financed through a tax that's on your bill when you purchase a new mattress that goes back to the manufacturers, who in turn pay us to do the deconstruction and the recycling of the mattresses. And in Connecticut, we're doing that with paint. We've done it with batteries. We're doing it with tires. And there's a lot of, looking into other kinds of products that with which that can be done. It's very, very popular, and it's pretty much, different kinds of products, but most states throughout the United States are doing it with some kinds of products that they think are really important to control.
Thank you for that. And I think we have time for just one more question over here.
You just answered my question, so I just want to say thank you for this film. It was amazing. I don't know now nothing about the carpet industry, but I do know about all the thresholds that we are facing in terms of climate change, biodiversity loss, the oceans, the Arctic. Well, I'm not going to keep talking about that, but seeing this was really something good. It gives hope. I don't know still how, I saw the film, but I still don't know how they put sustainability on the agenda in this country so many years ago. It was amazing, the leadership of that man. So I just want to thank you for that film. And just a few thoughts in case, because you were talking about maybe sharing this with professors, etc. Maybe I would think the United Nations Environment Program Initiative, the World Economic Forum. I used to work there. I can give you some context in case. Thank you so much.
Stick around. We need to talk when we're done.
Thank you for that question. And thank you again to this panel. A round of applause. And finally, just thank you all for joining us today. And thank you to the Nature Conservancy and GIF for bringing us here today. And a final thank you to Nathan. I just want to say, this is a little thing about me. I'm a child of 4, and Mercy, Jennifer, and Nathan are my 2 of my siblings' names. So thank you for being a part of this in a familial way. I'll be passing this back over to...
I just want to thank everyone for coming, and thank you so much to Nathan and all of our panelists and moderator for participating. I personally found it very powerful and impactful and inspiring, so I hope we'll help publicize it any way possible, and if there are future screenings in our area, we'll let our audience know.
Thanks
again.
Thanks
to the Burnetts and the Nature Conservancy.